President Trump is no stranger to extraordinary political statements. But even by his standards, today's was an astonishing shift in global diplomacy. An undermining attack on a supposed ally, echoing the sentiments of a supposed adversary. 24 hours after blaming Ukraine for starting the war, he launched a second attack directly on the country's president. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start. He added he refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia. He went on to say half the money was missing and that Zelenskyy had shattered his country and led to the deaths of millions. His words come one day after peace talks between the US and Russia that the Ukrainians were not part of. And as Donald Trump and President Putin seek to build a warmer diplomatic and economic relationship. Last night, President Trump accused Ukraine of starting the war.
You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
President Zelensky's dismissals of those comments seem to have rattled the commander-in-chief.
With
all due respect to President Donald Trump as a leader, he is living in this disinformation space.
What will alarm Zelenskyy and Ukraine's allies is that Trump's words echo those of Vladimir Putin, who has continually questioned Zelensky's legitimacy and demanded elections most likely so he can install a Russian-leaning leader. For his part, President Putin was maintaining a solemn pose in St. Petersburg this morning, despite no doubt relishing his burgeoning relationship with the American leader. Yesterday's talks are thought to be a precursor to a meeting between the two.
The goal of the meeting was precisely to increase trust between Russia and the United States. As for the other participants, firstly, Russia has never refused contacts with Europeans, and Russia has never refused the negotiation process with Ukraine. Never.
For 3 years, Putin has been the West's pariah. How fast things change. Emma Murphy, News at 10.
Well, as we've been hearing from Emma, President Trump has made some extraordinary statements in the past 24 hours. But is there any truth to them? Perhaps his boldest claim was saying Ukraine started the war. But as we know, it was Russia that launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, having annexed Crimea before that in 2014. Trump also called Zelenskyy a dictator in power without an election. But Ukraine has been under martial law since the Russian invasion, so elections are suspended. The same happened here during the Second World War. He also said millions have been killed in the conflict, but latest figures estimate it's closer to 250,000, admittedly still a horrendously high number. In a briefing last night, Trump also claimed Zelenskyy has a mere 4% approval rating in Ukraine, but in a survey this month, President Zelensky's trust rating reached 57%, the kind of support Trump enjoys in America. Well, Dan is in Washington with the very latest for us this evening. And Dan, we are expecting Donald Trump to speak very shortly this evening. Sometimes his rhetoric flip-flops, Dan, but on this issue, he seems pretty fixed.
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering, Paul, that this wasn't the result of a sort of off-the-cuff comment to a question. This was a deliberately written post on his Truth social media platform. He must have weighed the words somewhat before he wrote them and known the effect that they would have. This really the latest salvo, as you've set out in this war of words with President Zelenskyy. Look, all the way through the election, he's promised to try and get a deal on Ukraine. And it does feel at the moment that he is prioritising speed over substance to get that deal over the line. And this is made all the more awkward because his envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, is in Kyiv right now and is due to have a meeting with President Zelenskyy tomorrow. In terms of the reaction, well, unsurprisingly, Democrats here have been much more outspoken since that truth post was made by President Trump earlier on. We've heard from from one prominent Democrat, Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois, who said Trump is a pushover for Putin. In terms of the Republicans, they've been much more muted, concentrating their fire on President Putin instead. We've heard from Roger Whittaker from Mississippi saying Putin is a war criminal who should be in jail if not executed. As you say, we're about to hear from President Trump at a conference in Miami. It'll be interesting to hear if he does double down on his criticism of President Zelenskyy. But it feels like we're witnessing this whole fracturing of Western unity over Ukraine, and it's happening far quicker than anyone dared to predict.
OK, Dan in Washington for now. Thank you very much indeed. And let's return to Emma too, who's here with me in the studio. So this extraordinary exchange again today. Emma, world leaders have been reacting to this tonight as they scramble to try and meet with President Trump before he meets with Vladimir Putin. What have they been saying?
Well, we've heard from Keir Starmer this evening basically saying that he's been on the phone to President Zelenskyy after those comments were made by President Trump. And it was a call that was basically to reaffirm his support, to acknowledge that President Zelenskyy is in UK and European eyes the democratically elected president of Ukraine, that he needs help to try and resolve this situation, to get peace in the country. And it would be better if all people work together. And he also referenced the fact that during World War II, there were no elections in this country as a result of the state of war. And he has likened that to the situation that Ukraine's in. But of course, they're all treading an incredibly fine line. Keir Starmer is due to go to Washington next week to speak with President Trump. He sees himself, or is selling himself, as some kind of bridge between Ukraine, Europe and the president. But also, he's going to have to try and work out which side of the line he's going to be. Is he going to keep on supporting Ukraine in the way that we have vowed that we will, whilst also keeping Europe and President Trump on side? It's a really, really difficult balancing act. And also tonight we've heard from President Macron in France. He will also be heading off to speak with President Trump next week. So clearly they're trying to get the message through as much as possible and trying to really see who can be the Trump whisperer, who can be the person that convinces President Trump that he needs to look back towards Ukraine to hold that position that the Americans have held for 3 years. It's a tricky one, but in terms of where Ukraine is tonight, well, for 3 years, they've known who their enemy was. In fact, for more than 3 years, since 2014, at least, they've known who their enemy was. They seem to have found another one now in somebody that they thought was an ally. And I think this is a particularly precarious time, not just for Ukraine, but very personally for Vladimir Zelenskyy as well.
All right, Emma, a frenetic few days ahead. Thank you very much.